for joining us. We've recognized that it's very vital for everyone in the United States to know their rights, regardless of what their immigration status is. Whether you're a directly impacted individual or are an ally who cares for this community, we hope that we're able to empower you with knowledge and give you the tools to to exercise those rights effectively. So my name is Nayeli Rico Lopez. I am the coordinator for the Undocumented Student Program at the intersection. The Undocumented Student Program, just to tell you a little bit about us, is here to support our DACA, undocumented, and mixed status populations on campus, whether that's through an individual appointment to talk about professional licensing, or even alternative income generation pathways, or providing resource referrals. We are happy to provide that information and support to our students. And again, before I do introduce our presenters, I do want to let you all know that this training was strategically designed to be held through a virtual webinar to maintain attendee anonymity and also to be recorded and later posted to our Undocumented Student Program YouTube channel for future viewing. Please utilize the Q&A features to pose your questions for our presenters who will be answering them at the end. I will now like to present our two presenters for today's workshop. So Sadmira Ramik is the Senior Staff Attorney of the ACLU of Nevada. She's a graduate from the University of Louisville with a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and attended the university, their university school of law. Upon passing the Kentucky bar exam, she continued to work in their Metro Public Defender's Office as an assistant public defender representing indigent clients. She also maintained the position for nearly 3 years before making the move to Las Vegas. She joined the ACLU of Nevada to continue to serve the community and advocate for civil liberties and civil rights. We're also joined by Jessica, who is their assistant and also vital to coordinating this event today. And we also have Michael Kagan. Mike directs the university immigration clinic here at UNLV and teaches administrative law, professional responsibility, and immigration law. He has played a central role in expanding legal services to immigrants in Nevada. He led the establishment of the UNLV Immigration Clinic's off-campus community advocacy office as the first pro bono deportation defense center in Nevada, and also established the clinic's University Legal Services Program, which provides free immigration legal services to students and staff at UNLV. Mike is not only a well-known scholar, but a very important ally and advocate for our Nevada community. So thank you all for presenting today. And I will now turn it over to the ACLU to get us started with this presentation.
Thank you so much, Nayeli. Do you mind sharing your screen again so it pops back up?
Yes.
And while Nayeli's doing that, thank you all so much for being here. As she indicated, my name is Sadmira Ramik, and I'm a senior staff attorney with the ACLU of Nevada. And so obviously I deal with a lot of litigation work and civil rights, but my primary focus has been voting rights and immigration. So obviously immigration being at the forefront of the things we've been dealing with. A lot of things have came at us in the last just a couple of weeks, which seems like a year's worth of legal work. And we recognize that, it has raised a lot of questions, concerns from our community members. And in order to be able to put you in the best position to deal with what's happening, we truly do believe that knowing your rights is the first step. And so that's kind of what we'll go through. That's what we'll go through here now. And kind of walk you through what those rights are and what you can expect when encountering immigration enforcement. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of those specific rights and what we just mentioned, just a little bit of background on our affiliate. Obviously, we're the ACLU of Nevada. We advocate for civil rights and civil liberties, but we do that in a multitude of different ways. One of them being is through public education efforts and talking to individuals within communities so they know their rights, they know their responsibilities, kind of exactly what's happening here today. The other bucket is working through policy work to engage your local government to advance policies that do protect civil rights, but also preventing policies that don't. And then finally, our litigation work, which is where a lot of my work comes in, a lot of what I do is to defend the rights and liberties on a systemic level of individuals. So what that really means is that I think the key word being systemic. We are a small but mighty team. We have a lot of different areas that we focus on. And so we really do have to divvy up our resources and figure out where our resources can be maximized. And so we do work on, rather than taking on individual cases, work on that systemic level for in the immigration space specifically, just so you have an idea about what that looks like, is that we work on kind of pre-detention issues on that systemic level and then detention conditions. We don't represent people in, for example, removal proceedings, and wouldn't represent and help individuals fill out immigration paperwork and helping them through that process. Just a legal disclaimer, I would be a bad attorney if I did not put this out there. This is for informational purposes only. It's not intended to be legal advice. As we walk through the training, you'll see that there is the format that will follow is kind of indicating here are your rights and here's what you should do in the specific scenario. So as we're walking through that scenario, obviously recognizing the fact that we're a civil rights organization, we want you to know your rights and we would encourage you to exercise those rights if you ever put in that situation. As an overview, again, as I said, we're going to follow a specific format. We will go over your rights when interacting with law enforcement. And law enforcement here being a very broad term. So not only your local law enforcement, but federal agents such as ICE, FBI, anything of that sort. We'll walk through how to assert your rights in those specific instances. And then we'll also talk about the best practices, what you should do, what kind of documents should you carry and things like that. We will not cover removal proceedings and the after arrest processes. Again, we don't engage in that type of work. I think Professor Kagan will be able to hit on some of those points, but just want to have some ground setting beforehand. I know we're going to be taking some Q&As within the chat, so you all recognize kind of what we are able to answer and what we are not. So the first thing we'll discuss is if you've been stopped by police or ICE or other federal agents. Later on, we will get into if you are in your car and in your home, but this is specifically if you're stopped in your community, what are your rights and what should you do? And a couple of points just to make sure to reduce risk to yourself is to stay calm and don't resist or obstruct the agents or officers. Obviously, anytime you're interacting, even like right now as an attorney, if I'm interacting with police officers or dealing with that, it can be a bit intimidating. It can create confusion and you may feel like you're just at their mercy and you want to do what they tell you to do. But that's why we put on these Know Your Rights trainings so you can feel comfortable in knowing your rights, feel comfortable in exercising those rights, and also not feel like you're doing something wrong just by, telling the officer, here are my rights, this is what I would like to do. The second thing to reduce risk to yourself is do not lie or give false documents. Obviously, I want to say obviously, but this is one of the things that could later on come back and bite you. And so we want to be out front and make sure that you're not doing that when you encounter. And then the third is to prepare yourself and your family in case you are arrested. So beforehand, before you even get to the stage, memorize the phone numbers of your family and your lawyer. Make emergency plans if you are detained, such as childcare or, if you are taking medication. And we will touch upon that a little bit at the end of the training and what that looks like. So this is kind of like the meat of this specific section is what are your rights? Just like anybody else in this country, again, you have constitutional rights, whether you're undocumented, you do have status, you don't have status, everybody has certain constitutional rights. And the first right is that you have a right to remain silent. So you can tell an officer, I wish to remain silent, I do not wish to speak to you. You do not have to answer any of their questions. One thing I would like to flag is that in Nevada, we do have something called stop and identify laws. And then you'll see that as kind of like an underpoint here. This the stop and identify law is specifically pertaining to local government, so it's not talking about ICE officials or the federal agents. But if a local law enforcement officer stops you and they have what's called reasonable suspicion, they can ask you to provide your name, and you do have to provide your name. But even with that, a couple of things to remember is that you do not have to answer any other questions. And you do not have to provide documents showing what your name is in that instance. The second right you have is you do not have to consent to search of yourself or your belongings. That includes either your car, your home, you know, when they ask you, hey, do you mind if I just check your pockets? You have a right to say no. Again, with a lot of things going on in the legal world, and this is to just give you a flag in case it does happen. Sometimes police officers may pat you down outside of your clothing if they suspect you have a weapon. So if that happens, just be aware that that is something that they can't do. If you are arrested by police, you have a right to a government-appointed lawyer. That is different than if you're detained by ICE. So I just want to point out those differences. If you're detained by ICE, you have a right to consult with a lawyer, but they won't necessarily provide one for you. But in any case, if you are detained by ICE, you have the right to contact your consulate or have them be informed of your detention. You can ask for a lawyer. You can ask them to provide you an interpreter if you don't understand. And you can also ask them for a list of pro bono or low-cost attorneys to help represent you in those proceedings. And I'm sure maybe Professor Kagan will get into that a little bit more. Next slide, please.
Let me know if it changes. My computer is lagging a little bit, unfortunately, but.
No worries. Thank you, Jess. So this is kind of like a step-by-step walkthrough. You know, these are your rights. What should you do if you are at this point detained or arrested? Again, remain calm. You can ask if you are free to leave. If they say yes, obviously you can leave. If they say no, at that point you are detained. You can say, I wish to remain silent, and then ask to speak to an attorney. You can say, I do not consent to search of my personal property. You should not sign anything without a lawyer being present. If you're over 18, you should carry your papers on you at all times. So if an ICE agent or a federal agent asks you whether or not, let's say they encounter you and they say, do you have documents showing that you can be here in the United States? If it is an immigration agent, you do have to show them the papers if you do have them. However, if you do not have paperwork, the best thing for you would be to state, I wish to remain silent and speak with an attorney before answering any questions. This very last part here, if you see on the slide, it says if you are a non-citizen. This one kind of gets to the point of being arrested for a criminal offense and then dealing with ICE as well. If you are arrested for a criminal offense, one important thing for you to do is to make sure that you discuss your immigration status with whoever your attorney is, because a lot of the things that if you may plead to something, could impact your immigration process. Next slide, please. Now we're kind of shift focused from being detained or arrested while within the community and focusing on while you're in transit. So specifically, if you're stopped in your car. Driver and passengers, again, have the right to remain silent. So it applies to if you're the driver or if you're a passenger in the car, you still have the same right to remain silent. Same thing as well, if they ask to search your car, you can refuse to give them consent to search. And I know there have been some questions regarding Border Patrol and what that looks like as well. We have received a couple of questions related to that before. Nevada is very far from the border. I won't say very far, but it's far enough from the border where Border Patrol typically does not patrol or conduct what is called the roving patrols. And so usually Border Patrol will stay within the 100-mile border. Nevada being outside of that, you typically will not see them here. However, even if you do, just be aware that it's similar to other law enforcement agencies, is that your same rights apply. They do have to meet certain criteria to stop you, and you can ask them if they had probable cause for stopping you, and they should tell you. So if you are stopped in your car, what should you do? And I'll keep repeating this several times throughout, but you should remain calm. It is very easy to get hyped up with emotion, but don't run or argue or obstruct the officer. If you are being the driver, you pull over in a safe place. If you are a passenger, you can ask if you're free to leave. If they say yes, calmly leave. If they say no, you should remain. If you are a driver, you are required to show your driver's license, your registration, and proof of insurance. However, you do not have to show any other documentation other than if an immigration agent requests your papers. So I'll just go through that because I don't want it to get I don't want it to get too confusing. So if you're in your car, just like everybody else, you have to show your driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance. If you are not a U.S. citizen and an immigration agent requests your papers, you do have to provide them with you. If you don't have them, you should ask them to remain silent to speak with an attorney. Do not consent to search of your personal property. You can simply say, I do not consent. And you do not have to sign anything without a lawyer being present. A lot of the times, what can happen is that there will be some paperwork. A lot of the times it's legalese, it's hard to understand. There may be a language barrier. So it's important for you to at least speak with a lawyer prior to that, because you could be signing away some of your rights, as well as, hindering the immigration process that could have a negative impact. So this scenario that we'll walk through is if police or federal agents are at your home. Again, same rights apply. You have the right to remain silent. You have a right to refuse consent to search of your property or your person, and you have a right to speak to an attorney. But there are a few differences that you should be aware of when having someone if ICE agents do come to your home. You have the right to remain silent even if they have a warrant. You do not have to let police or immigration agents into your home unless they have a judicial warrant. And this one we're going to break down a little bit more. So if an immigration agent or police come to your door, they can ask you to come in and you can tell them, yes, I would like to, you can come in. We wouldn't advise that. You should exercise your rights to not give consent, but that is something that you can do. However, if they have something called a judicial warrant, they can come into your home without your consent. But it is very important to know the difference between a judicial warrant and then what's been called an administrative warrant. So administrative warrant, you'll see, comes from immigration court. So here's a side-by-side to make it a little bit easier for you to understand how they look different and what to look for. So if you look on the right-hand side, this has the label of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It'll say warrant of removal. And at the bottom, it's not a judge that's signing it. It's usually an immigration officer. That is an administrative warrant, and that does not give them permission to come into your home unless you give them consent. On the other hand, if you look to the left-hand side, this is a judicial warrant. And some of the cues that you can look for is at the very top. It says United States District Court, so that tells you it's a federal or state court. And it will be signed by a judge. If you look at the very bottom, here it says U.S. Magistrate Judge. So that is specifically a judge that signed this warrant. It comes from a federal or state court. And if they do have that, they have the right to enter your home without consent. So let's just walk through what you should do, step-by-step scenario. ICE agents, police come to your door. What should you do? What should you say? How does this play out? And the first thing is you have a right not to open the door. And you probably shouldn't open the door. And if there's someone within your household that does have documentation, it's typically best to have them interact with whoever is at the door at that time. The first thing you should do is ask them to identify themselves. You can ask for a badge or identification through the window or peephole. And we say that because one, agents have been known to use deceptive practices, so they will just outright lie to you. They will make up stories about, hey, we're the local police, we're looking for somebody, can we talk to you, can we come in? They'll make up stories about, hey, we're investigating a crime against one of your family members, can you step outside so we can talk to you? They will do what they can, especially if they don't have that judicial warrant, to try to get you to come outside or to let them into your home. And another thing that why it's so important to ask for identification is that recently in the news, we've been hearing about, unfortunately, individuals taking advantage of the immigration population and immigrant population. And they're now impersonating ICE agents and acting as if they're ICE agents so they can, take your car or get into your home. And so it's very important that you take these steps and assert your rights to also protect yourself in that manner. So after asking them to identify themselves, let's say they say, yes, this is ICE, we need to talk to you, open the door. Again, you do not have to open the door. You can ask them if they have a warrant signed by a judge or the judicial warrant we just talked about. If they don't produce the warrant, they cannot enter your home without consent. And you can keep the door closed. You can simply state, I do not consent to your entry. However, if they do have the judicial warrant, they do have the right to come into your home. If agents force their way in and they do not have a warrant, you should not resist. It may be a difficult situation. It may be, again, tensions may be high, but you should do your best to keep asserting your rights, state, I do not consent to your entry or the search of the premises, assert your right to remain silent, assert your right to speak to an attorney. Don't sign anything without a lawyer present. And again, don't produce any false documents. And try to be very mindful about what's going on around you. What are they looking at? How many agents are there? Is there local police with them? Just try to keep as much information as you possibly can, because that helps us on our end in case they're doing something that they should not be doing. So just now we talked to, 3 different scenarios. If you're stopped by immigration or police, if you're in your car and stopped, what to do if they come to your home. This next few slides will kind of take you to make sure that you're prepared for dealing with these situations. And really, like, what documents should you carry to help yourself? What can be detrimental to you? So do carry Know Your Rights cards. We do provide those on our website. As I know other organizations provide them as well. They'll typically be small cards with the exact rights that we just talked about, right to remain silent, to an attorney, and the right to not consent to search of your property or your person. You should carry state and local forms of identification, so driver license, identification card, anything else that has your name, date, or anything like that on it. And the contacts that you would need in case something does happen. Do not carry any documents that identify you as a citizen of another country, because that could be used later in immigration proceedings against you. I'd be amiss if I didn't flag one thing as something that we should keep in mind going forward, and something that we will update as we get more information. There has been, some concerns from community members of, what if my identification would then be used to prove that I'm not a citizen or that I haven't been in the country for more than 2 years. And so I think the big thing to focus on is that you shouldn't have the documents identifying you as a citizen of another country. And that going forward, you should try to have as much state and local forms of identification that at least shows proof that you've been here longer than 2 years. And this just kind of breaks down like what a family preparedness plan could look like. This is what we hit upon earlier in the training. This is something that you should sit down with family or friends and have in place just in case something does happen. I'm sure Professor Kagan can speak to this as well, but having a process in place, all of the documents together in one place, knowing who to contact, it could be one that, like make it or break it in terms of providing documents to immigration court, but it could also help the transition smoother in terms of who is taking care of your children, what legal efforts to obtain your status, and what documents could be provided to an attorney who's going to be communicating with that attorney. So really important to get that information down and plan ahead. So in case something does happen, you don't have to worry about actually figuring that out, especially if you are detained. And I do have, in terms of like a full breakdown and a great example of a family preparedness plan, the Legal Aid Society does have a good one on their website, and something that we could provide afterwards as well if anyone has specific questions as to that. But they do have a good detailed breakdown of what that looks like. If you believe your rights were violated, there's several steps that you can take. Again, focusing on trying to remember as much as possible who were the officers involved. If you're able to get their patrol car numbers, were they local or federal agents? Are there witnesses that could help support your version of events, things of that nature? So just as much details as you can remember, and try to write them down afterwards as well. You can obviously file a complaint within the Internal Affairs Division with that specific agency. And then on our website, specifically at aclunv.org, we do have a violation report that you could fill out. Again, being mindful of the fact that we do work on systemic litigation, but we also want to be able to, if we can't directly help you out, we could possibly point you in the right direction or provide you the right resources on who can help out. So for us, it's important to know the information, what is happening, if anyone's being targeted for our own cases, but also to be able to provide the actual resources of someone who can help you if it's not something that we can do. I know this is a lot of information. I know taking it in, but if anything, I always like to have, the key takeaways at the very end. So if you remember anything from what we talked about, these are the key takeaways. Assert your right to remain silent. Do not sign anything without a lawyer. You have a right to speak to an attorney. Try to remain calm. Do not consent to search of your personal property. Don't run, and do not provide any false documents. So just focus on those key rights. Focus on, maintaining that calm and trying to make sure that you are put in the best situation, that if anything does happen, it's not being used against you later on. This is just a QR code for additional resources. It does take you directly to our website. And so if you pull it up, you'll see that there's a bucket list. There's several buckets of Know Your Rights materials. It does have one for individual rights. It kind of goes over in more detail what we just discussed here. So if you do have any questions related to that or want a little more information, and it does have additional resources at the very end who are our partners, who are individuals within the community that can help out in certain situations. So just I would recommend using it, checking our website, because we are having things happen and change almost every day. And so we update our information on our website every day. So it's much better for up-to-date information to use links rather than trying to print off that information. Nayeli, I have a couple more things actually that's actually not on the slides, but obviously given that we are talking to a lot of students from higher education, I do want to flag, your rights in terms of privacy and the information that the school can share. So under federal law, and the acronym is FERPA, so it's Federal Education Rights and Privacy Act. This specifically states that a school who gets federal funds cannot provide the private information of a student unless they get their consent. If you're over 18, they need your consent. If you're under 18, they would need your parents' consent. And so that does protect a lot of your information and establishes several different things that the school must follow. So for example, they can't share that information. If someone requests that information, they're supposed to keep a record within your student record that this is the agency that requested it, here's what they asked for. And also if the information is requested, they're supposed to notify you and let you know. Just like with any legal law, there's exceptions. And so this is where you would come in. I want you to be mindful of what you can do. One of the exceptions to this law is what they call directory information. So if it's your name or your address, they can provide that without your consent. But again, I think that there's some cases out there that would say that information still can be revealed for immigration purposes. But in either case, you have a right to request that even that information not be shared. So an action step leaving here, if anything, in terms of protecting your privacy and information is to let the university know, or whatever school you're going to know, that you do not consent to that information being shared with anybody. So that's another layer of protection to help you out. So that's all I have. Happy to take any questions in the Q&A, and I think that that's going to be afterwards, is my understanding.
Yes, thank you, Sadmira. We appreciate this information and the work that you're doing in supporting our immigrant and undocumented community in Nevada. I do want to pass it on to Mike to add anything else that might be more pertaining to the higher education space, and feel free to add on to the directory information as well, Mike.
Right. Thank you. Thanks, Admira. Thanks, Nayeli. What I'm going to try to do is very quickly talk about what happens after an ICE arrest in terms of removal proceedings. But in that context of that, I want to highlight what the UNLV Immigration Clinic does, how people can prepare themselves essentially or their families for the worst case scenarios. But then I also hope, since I'm a part, like Nayeli, part of the UNLV community, to put all of this in context, I think, in terms of the role that all of us can play at the university, which I think is really important. So Sadmira just described, in terms of knowing your rights, that essentially the arrest stage or the encounter stage, which could lead to an arrest if ICE is talking to someone, and that remaining silent is incredibly important. It does not, depending on the context and the facts of the case and who ICE is looking for, it can really stop a deportation or limit the number of people who are deported. It's very common for ICE to be looking for one person, and and then to also try to make collateral arrests. In fact, that's one of the things that the Trump administration very much wants to do. Those collateral arrests often depend on what people say when they encounter ICE. And if they had stayed silent, those arrests either might not be made, or it might be possible to stop the deportation later. So if ICE is coming and looking for Mike Kagan, they may already know Mike Kagan, right? So it might not actually matter that much what I say. But if I am hanging out with Sadmira or Nayeli And if they know to stay silent, ICE might not take them too. And it really can matter. Tom Homan, the ICE border czar, has complained that in some cities that they've not been able to make as many arrests as they wanted to, because he said the community was too well educated because of what he said they call know your rights trading. So we need to keep that up and keep his frustration level up as high as possible, in my opinion. I'm not speaking for UNLV on that, but I stand by that. So there's a lot of complexity that I am not going to try to cover here. Generally speaking, people can't be deported from inside the United States without a removal order. And that is and to get a removal order, the usual way is to take someone to immigration court. And we are going to be fighting along with the ACLU and others to maintain that. That is the due process. It is not perfect process, but we are going to have to struggle to keep that, so that, because they clearly are going to want to try to find ways to deport people without any process at all. The UNLV Immigration Clinic focuses on deportation defense. And I have some colleagues who are here lurking in this session, so I'm calling them out now. But people were working really hard doing this long before Trump took office. I think it's important to understand Trump did not invent deportation. It was going on all along under the Biden administration and before that. And and now the level of panic and strain is even higher. The government does not provide lawyers for people in deportation, but having a lawyer is probably the single biggest thing that can change someone's odds of being able to avoid deportation. So our services are free, but limited in capacity. And we represent three groups, but one of them is very well represented in this session. So one group is people detained by ICE. I hope nobody here ever has that experience, but if you do, that is one of the groups that we will represent. Unaccompanied kids. And then I'm not going to say too much about that here. And university legal services, in some ways that's the exception, although some in the worst scenarios can involve deportation defense, and can involve our widest range of services in some ways, because it can involve family sponsorships, naturalization, other things as well, hopefully happier. But any UNLV student is eligible, as well as some staff. And I tried before, it looked like I wasn't able to put links in the chat, but we can share you don't email me to make appointments. I will just tell you to go to the link to make an appointment. Capacity is limited, but it is supported by UNLV, and it's a service sort of like the student health service, basically. So I want to say a couple things. The removal proceedings, this is not covered well in the media, but just because ICE has arrested someone does not mean that they legally should be deported, could be deported, or that they have nothing to say for themselves. In fact, it's totally normal that ICE tries to deport people and then they end up walking out of the proceedings with a legal status. That is actually why it's so important to insist on due process. It is our immigration laws are often illogical and cruel, but there are ways that some people can defend themselves from deportation, but it really is important to get a lawyer. If you are ever taken to immigration court, much like when ICE comes to your door, there were a lot of pressure is put on people to admit the charges. Don't say you want a lawyer and ask for more time to find a lawyer. I'm going to follow up on the issues about documents. Amira talked about documents to carry. One of the things that holds us back from being able to defend people in immigration court in a lot of ways is that their family has trouble accessing the documents that we would need to be able to argue their case. And especially if someone is detained, which means they can't get to their own documents. So one of the things we'd really like to advise people to do is have documents collected in a private place, ideally electronically, but where someone in your family can access it, so as to send it to us or any other lawyer you might hire. A UNLV student who has immigrant family members might be the most technologically savvy person in your family. If you help your family set up a Facebook account, help them also gather documents that you could access in an emergency. Because time is of the essence to be able to intervene, and the sooner we get documents, the sooner someone might be able to defend your relative in court. And that is something that really prevents us from stepping in on some cases where we might be able to. So it's something where we'd like people to get prepared in advance. Not only being prepared, the Legal Aid Center of Nevada has some good guides on setting up guardianships and things like that, and that is important in terms of being prepared for the worst case scenario of actual deportation. But don't forget that people can defend themselves from deportation, but that takes preparation too. So that's another thing I'd like to emphasize. And then finally, I just want to say we're deluged by requests from the media and from organizations to do know your rights trainings like this. It's hard on all of our staff because people are handling regular cases that have deadlines and a lot of work, and that's the primary job. And essentially the last 2.5 weeks, there's just been such demand for this kind of information. But I also want to say, and I know from my own email inbox that there's a lot of people are worried about the ICE coming to my door, teachers worried about ICE coming to my classroom. Some of this might happen and it's good to think about, but I think it's important not to remember to think about some other things too, right? Particularly for classrooms, I think it's relatively unlikely. I'm not saying it'll never happen somewhere in the country, and I hope not here, but it's not going to be the typical way ICE is going to arrest people. And so and remember, this is not just about legal processes and arrests, it's also about who belongs in our community and in our country. And all of us have a say in that. And I think at a university where we're sort of a microcosm, a kind of a small town within a city and within a country, I think we can help resist what's going on just by signaling that we value the people around us, and whatever, to do our jobs, to share notes with another student sitting next to you, and also sometimes even little things, to not always talk about the most stressful things. I'm not great at this myself, but because I'm pretty stressed out by what's going on, but if you happen to have an undocumented immigrant friend that you sit in class with, don't be afraid to talk about the Super Bowl with that person, because undocumented immigrants have other interests and don't need to be thinking about the scary stuff all the time. None of us do. And actually acting normal and saying everyone else around me is normal is its own act of defiance, because what the message we're all getting is that we all should panic and that some people don't belong, and we need to resist that in every way. So I don't know how long I've spoken for, but I'll stop because I'm sure there's questions, and happy to answer them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike. Yes, we have gotten several questions. So I'll open up the floor. I see that we have gotten some already in the Q&A box, but feel free to type those in there, and we'll try to answer those as we receive them. So the first one I have, and it's open for anyone to answer. What are the rights that can protect undocumented immigrants if stopped at an immigration checkpoint?
I mean, I can take part of that, and I think Professor Kagan, if you want to jump into immigration checkpoint, I'm thinking more so of, on the border, you coming through kind of thing. Just like any point of entry, it is a little bit different in terms of what rights you can exercise. So, for example, if I go to the airport and, they don't need a warrant for me to scan my bag to see my ID to make sure the right person is boarding. That's similar at any border when you're entering at that stage. Two very specific things that I do want to highlight is, obviously there's a lot of leeway in terms of the questions that they can ask you, searching your vehicle and things of that nature. But when answering specific questions, again, you do have the right to remain silent. But if you are a legal permanent resident, so you're not a citizen, but you're not undocumented, you're legal permanent resident, really the only documentation that and questions you should have to answer is about your providing your name, your status, and being able to provide documents that you are a legal permanent resident. Unfortunately, on that flip side, if you don't have documentation, you do have to worry about possibly not be giving entry into the United States if you don't answer their questions. So I think that that's a little bit more nuanced in terms of having a direct answer, but recognizing that just like at any point of entry, the constitutional rights and the requirements are much more lax compared to what we just discussed.
Right. Just to clarify that though, if you are in Las Vegas, unless you're at the airport, you're not asking for entry to the United States. You're already here. There's a weird thing in immigration law that Samir was just referring to about the obligation to show documents. It's if you have them. So what's strange about that is if you're lawfully here, you'll have documents. Then you have to show them. The people who are most vulnerable, who are undocumented, don't have documents, so there's nothing to show. And actually, the way it's written in the statute, you're not obligated to show what you don't have. So give only your name, basically, and say, I want to remain silent about other questions. And that includes the question, where were you born? I know that sounds really innocent. I do this with students. I get them all basically to make themselves deportable very easily. People will disclose that without hesitation because it sounds so innocuous. But in immigration law, the merely being born in another country can be used to presume that you are deportable. It's very dangerous. It's very problematic, but that is the current law. So you can't even say where you're born. Just say, I want to remain silent.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And it may not be like, hey, where were you born? It may ask, oh, what's your nationality? Where are you from? How did you come into the United States? And so it may be a variation of the questions, but that's still trying to get to the same point of trying to get you to say that you were not born in the United States.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next question we have is, do passengers need to identify themselves in an immigration stop? And that's pertaining to car rides, I believe.
I guess I would need a little more in terms of immigration stop, but thinking in the context of what we went through, and let's say you're in a car, that car is stopped and you are a passenger. I imagine it might be pertaining to the Nevada stop and identify laws. So I'll answer it in that way. Maybe they can clarify if it's something different. And I don't answer that question. But important thing to know about Nevada stop and identify laws. Again, you have the right to remain silent. For the Nevada stop and identify laws, it pertains to local law enforcement. It's not pertaining to the federal agents. And it's a very legally loaded term, but you have to provide your name. They can ask for your name if they have reasonable suspicion that criminal activity is occurring. So if they have reasonable suspicion that criminal activity is occurring, they can ask you your name and you're required to provide it. I'm not going to get into what may constitute this reasonable suspicion, but just being mindful of that there are instances if the local law enforcement asks you your name, you might be required to provide it. You would have to provide it in that instance, but more importantly, recognizing that you do not have to answer any other questions and you do not have to provide documentation showing what your name is and things like that. And obviously, being a passenger in the car, you don't have to show your driver's license or anything like that.
Next question I have is, who is notified when an individual has been detained? How can family members contact agencies to check to see if their loved ones have been detained? And then what are some internal processes at UNLV if we are informed of a student being detained?
Okay, I'll take a stab at this. For ICE detention, when someone is in ICE detention, there's an ICE detainee locator where you can look them up. You need to know some basics about their information. So again, that's a reason why you want family member to know. People can make phone calls out too from ICE detention, but there's a lag, so you don't get immediate notification. And UNLV is not going to get immediate notification. The way we're going to hear about someone is from a family member. So having a family member knowing, like emergency contacts who know what to do if you're arrested by ICE and who to call. So you only have to notify one person and then they know what to do and where your documents are and how to get and what lawyer to call. That's really helpful, right? That's how we will find out, right? All that UNLV will find out is someone, if it's a student, is someone doesn't show up for class, right? And we won't know why. Just like anything else, ICE is not going to notify the university.
You. I also have if one were to witness an ICE search, what are their limitations in supporting those targeted? And I'll add on to that, can video recording happen?
Yes, you are allowed to record those certain instances. I would encourage you to record if you can, because having recorders can help support your version of the events. Obviously, you can't obstruct or prevent the immigration officers or what other officer from doing what they need to do. But if you're simply sticking back and recording, that is your right, and you are able to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, go ahead. You may hit upon it.
I think as we look at this and how to support people, right, that the politics still matters, and a lot of people, a lot of Americans, unfortunately, I think, at a surface level, developed very anti-immigrant views on the surface over the last few years, and would tell pollsters, yes, I support mass deportation, without thinking too much about who they think are going to be deported, or imagining it's only the bad ones, right? And it wouldn't affect me. And one of the way, as immigration enforcement becomes more indiscriminate, to push back on this, it is going to be important for people to see what's happening. This is happening already, just in the last 2.5 weeks, right? That when there is a pushback and a change in the politics, when people see ICE going into a grocery store, lining people up and arresting someone because they're a citizen from Puerto Rico, and so if it's important to document what's happening, it's important to let the people know, because the picture that the government wants to paint is that all immigrants are basically gang members and killers. And when they see, actually, no, these are regular people like I see, and you're terrorizing a neighborhood or a school and disrupting a family's life, that will change some people's minds, and that will help us push back on this and to prevent the number of people who are impacted directly. And that's what we need. We don't just leave it, lawyers are going to be important. Everyone's going to be important, though. Don't leave it just to the lawyers and the legal defense. We're going to need a political pushback to this as well. And everyone's going to need to be involved in that.
Next question I have is, how about citizens of other countries who are on valid temporary visas in the US, like people on student or exchange scholar visas or people on tourist visas who have not overstayed? Is it still not recommended to present passports from foreign countries if they have valid visa stamps?
Can I just say, look, everyone's individual situation is different, and that is one of the reasons why the best advice for pretty much everyone is to get a legal consultation, and then you can talk through with an attorney exactly how you individually should handle it. In a sessions like this, we have to give it's more like a public health setting, right? Like, we have to give across the board advice. The default is remain silent. Right. And but to go beyond that, I'd want you to get an individual consultation. So that's one of the services that we offer for UNLV students at University Legal Services. My colleague Aubrey Maples, who's the attorney who does that work, reminded me that in addition to an online scheduling, which is the way we do it usually, if anyone from UNLV is detained, that then call us. So that's an exception for us. But we don't want anyone from UNLV to need that service, but it's there. But again, get an individual consultation about your exact situation and what's going on. Generally speaking, without knowing anything about someone individually, the right to remain silent is really important. The government has to actually bear a burden of proof to get a deportation order against someone. Remaining silent makes them work harder to meet that burden, and that is why it frustrates them sometimes.
I think that's all the time we have for questions. I encourage everyone to stay involved and in touch with the ACLU of Nevada to sit in on future Know Your Rights trainings. And they did share their QR code as well as a link in the chat that includes the PowerPoint for their piece of the presentation. Again, thank you all for taking the time to join this webinar. again, like I said, knowledge is power, and by understanding your rights, you're taking an important step in protecting yourself and your community. I also want to share that the intersection located in the Student Union Room 121 does have Know Your Rights cards. And I would encourage students to come by and pick some of those up. We have cards available in 6 different languages, including Spanish, English, Tagalog, and more. And we did record this webinar, so we will be uploading the recording to our Undocumented Student Program YouTube channel, and encourage everyone to stay involved and informed. I will share my screen again with some links to our different organizations and contact information and websites. So please stay informed. And keep an eye out for the recording of this session. Remember that you're not alone. There's resources and support available to help. So we hope that you all, take care and be safe.